Hello, curious minds. Mr. Curious here, back with another video. So make sure to sit back and relax. Maybe grab a snack or two. And with that said, I'll let my assistant take it from here.
Have you ever noticed that the person who judges you the most is often yourself? Think about the last mistake you made. Maybe you said something embarrassing, failed at something important, or simply didn't live up to your own expectations. Now imagine a close friend made that exact same mistake. Would you judge them as harshly as you judged yourself? Probably not. What's strange is that this isn't a rare experience. Millions of people replay awkward conversations long after they've ended. They dwell on mistakes nobody else remembers. They focus on flaws that others barely notice. It's as if we all carry around a critic that's constantly evaluating everything we do. But why? Why are we often our own harshest critics? At first glance, the answer seems obvious. Maybe we're simply perfectionists. Maybe we expect too much from ourselves. Or maybe modern life has made us overly concerned with success, appearance, and what others think. While these explanations contain some truth, they don't tell the whole story. To understand what's really happening, we need to look much deeper into the way the human mind was shaped over thousands of years. The voice inside our heads is something almost everyone experiences. It is the part of us that reacts to our choices, our mistakes, and our actions. Sometimes this voice helps us. It tells us to prepare better, learn from our failures, and improve ourselves. But sometimes it becomes much harsher. Instead of guiding us, it starts judging us. A small mistake becomes a reason to doubt ourselves. A failure becomes something we define ourselves by. So what exactly is this inner critic, and why does it have so much power over us? Psychologists refer to this tendency as self-criticism. In simple terms, it is the habit of evaluating ourselves in a harsh or negative way. The interesting thing is that self-criticism is not entirely bad. Without it, we might never learn from our mistakes or push ourselves to grow. The problem begins when the voice stops being helpful and starts becoming hostile. Instead of saying, "I made a mistake," it says, "I am a mistake." And that small difference can change everything. Think about it for a moment. When a friend fails an exam, misses a deadline, or makes an embarrassing mistake, we usually separate the person from the mistake. We understand that one bad moment does not define who they are. Yet when it comes to ourselves, we often do the exact opposite. A single failure can make us question our abilities. A single rejection can make us question our worth. But why does our brain treat our own mistakes so differently? For some people, the inner critic appears after a major failure. For others, it shows up in everyday moments. Maybe you send a message and immediately wonder if it sounded strange. Maybe you replay a conversation in your head and think of all the things you should have said instead. Or maybe you spend hours worrying about a mistake that nobody else even noticed. The strange thing is that while these moments may seem different, they often come from the same place. In many cases, the inner critic does not sound like an enemy. It sounds like a protector. It convinces us that if we think hard enough about our mistakes, we can avoid making them again. If we criticize ourselves first, nobody else will have the chance. If we lower our expectations, we cannot be disappointed. But over time, this protection can become a prison. What makes the inner critic so convincing is that it often uses our own voice. Unlike criticism from another person, there is no clear separation between the critic and the person being criticized. The thoughts feel personal. They feel true. And because they come from within, we rarely stop to question them. Instead, we accept them as facts. But just because a thought appears in our mind does not mean it reflects reality. If the inner critic causes so much stress, then why do we have it at all? Why would the human mind develop a voice that constantly points out our flaws, mistakes, and shortcomings? At first, it seems like a design flaw. But what if this voice was never meant to make us feel good? What if it was created for an entirely different purpose? To find the answer, we need to look far beyond modern life and into the environment where the human mind first evolved. To understand why we are so hard on ourselves, we need to imagine a world very different from our own. A world without cities, schools, jobs, or social media. For most of human history, our ancestors lived in small groups and tribes. life was difficult, food was not guaranteed, danger was everywhere, and perhaps most importantly, survival often depended on other people. In those early tribes, being accepted by the group was not just a social advantage. It was often a matter of survival. The people around you helped find food, share resources, protect one another, and care for the young. Being separated from the group could mean facing the dangers of the world alone. As a result, our ancestors became highly sensitive to anything that might threaten their place within the tribe. And that sensitivity is still with us today. Imagine making a mistake that caused others to lose trust in you. Perhaps you ignored a warning, failed to contribute to the group, or acted in a way that put others at risk. In a small tribe, your reputation mattered. The way others saw you could influence whether they cooperated with you, supported you, or included you. Over time, the human brain evolved to pay close attention to social mistakes, not because it wanted to make us miserable, but because it wanted to help us stay connected to the group. This may explain why criticism can feel surprisingly painful. Logically, we know that an awkward conversation, an embarrassing moment, or a rejection is not life-threatening. Yet, our emotional reaction can feel much larger than the event itself. That is because the brain does not always distinguish between physical danger and social danger as clearly as we might expect. To an ancient human, losing the support of the group could have serious consequences, and so the mind learned to treat signs of rejection as something important to pay attention to. The problem is that the world has changed far faster than the human brain. Today, most mistakes are not matters of survival. Forgetting a presentation, saying something awkward, or receiving criticism online is unlikely to put our lives at risk. Yet the brain often reacts as if these events are far more important than they really are. The ancient systems that once helped our ancestors survive are still running in the background, influencing how we think and feel every day. In a way, the inner critic can be seen as an overprotective guard. Its job is to look for problems before they happen. It constantly scans for mistakes, weaknesses, and threats to our social standing. When it finds one, it sounds the alarm. The trouble is that this guard is far more focused on keeping us safe than keeping us happy, and sometimes it sees danger where none exists. This helps explain something many of us have experienced. You can receive 10 compliments and 1 criticism, yet the criticism is the thing you remember. You can achieve something you've worked toward for months, yet a single mistake steals all of your attention. If the brain is designed to look for potential threats, then negative experiences naturally stand out more than positive ones. Psychologists call this tendency the negativity bias. Imagine receiving 10 messages. 9 of them are positive, 1 of them is critical. Which one are you most likely to remember? For many people, the answer is obvious. The criticism stays in their mind long after the compliments have faded. It is not because they are weak, insecure, or overly sensitive. It is because the human brain was never designed to treat all information equally. From an evolutionary perspective, paying attention to negative information made sense. If our ancestors ignored a beautiful sunset, very little was lost. But if they ignored a dangerous animal, spoiled food, or a threat from another group, the consequences could be severe. As a result, the brain became especially good at noticing potential problems. Over thousands of years, this tendency helped humans survive, but in the modern world, it can sometimes work against us. This is why embarrassing memories often linger for years. Most people can easily remember a moment when they said the wrong thing, made a mistake, or felt humiliated. Yet many struggle to recall the countless ordinary days when nothing went wrong. The brain tends to save emotionally significant negative experiences because it assumes they contain important lessons. Unfortunately, it does not always know when it is time to let them go. While our brains may have evolved in small tribes, we no longer live in small tribes. Today, we are connected to hundreds, thousands, or even millions of people through the internet. For the first time in human history, it is possible to compare ourselves with strangers from around the world every single day. And whether we realize it or not, those comparisons can have a powerful effect on how we see ourselves. Consider social media. Most people share their achievements, milestones, and happiest moments. What we rarely see are the failures, doubts, setbacks, and struggles that exist behind the scenes. As a result, we end up comparing our everyday lives to someone else's highlight reel. And that comparison often leaves us feeling as though we are falling behind. The strange thing is that comparison itself is not necessarily bad. Humans have always compared themselves to others. It can help us learn, improve, and understand where we stand within a group. The problem begins when comparison stops being a source of growth and becomes a source of self-worth. When that happens, every success feels temporary, and every failure feels personal. Many people also grow up believing that being hard on themselves is the key to success. They believe that if they stop criticizing themselves, they will become lazy, unmotivated, or complacent. So they push harder, they demand more from themselves. And when they fail to meet those expectations, they respond with even more criticism. What begins as a strategy for improvement can slowly become a cycle that is difficult to escape. Ironically, research suggests that excessive self-criticism often has the opposite effect. Instead of motivating us, it can increase stress, anxiety, and fear of failure. When every mistake feels like a threat to our identity, taking risks becomes much harder. We become afraid of failing, afraid of looking foolish, afraid of discovering that we are not as capable as we hoped. And so we avoid the very challenges that help us grow. At this point, a difficult question begins to emerge. If being hard on ourselves does not always help us improve, then what should we do instead? Should we simply ignore our mistakes? Should we lower our standards? Or is there another way to grow without constantly attacking ourselves in the process? To answer that, we need to look at a concept that psychologists call self-compassion. When people hear the phrase self-compassion, they often misunderstand what it means. Some imagine making excuses for their mistakes. Others think it means lowering their standards or avoiding responsibility. But that is not what psychologists mean by self-compassion. At its core, self-compassion is the ability to treat ourselves with the same understanding and kindness that we would offer to another person facing the same situation. I'll say it again. Imagine a close friend comes to you after failing at something important. Would you call them worthless? Would you tell them that one mistake defines who they are? Probably not. You would acknowledge their disappointment, remind them that failure is a part of life, and encourage them to keep moving forward. Self-compassion asks a simple question. Why should that same understanding apply to everyone except ourselves? This does not mean ignoring mistakes. Mistakes still matter. There are times when we need to take responsibility, learn from our actions, and make changes. The difference is that self-compassion focuses on growth rather than punishment. Instead of asking, "What is wrong with me?" it asks, "What can I learn from this?" And that small shift can completely change the way we respond to failure. So why are we so hard on ourselves? The answer is more complicated than it first appears. Part of it comes from our evolutionary history. Part of it comes from the way our brains prioritize threats and negative experiences. And part of it comes from the world we live in today, where comparison is constant and expectations often feel impossible to meet. Together, these forces create the inner critic that so many of us struggle with. The truth is that the inner critic was never designed to make us happy. In many ways, it evolved to keep us safe. It tries to protect us from rejection, failure, and social judgment. The problem is that a system built for survival does not always know what is best for our well-being. Sometimes it warns us about dangers that no longer exist, and sometimes it mistakes growth for a threat. Perhaps the goal is not to silence the inner critic completely. After all, it can still teach us valuable lessons. Perhaps the real challenge is learning when to listen and when to let it pass. Because not every negative thought deserves our attention. Not every mistake deserves punishment. And not every failure deserves to become part of our identity. The next time you find yourself replaying a mistake, criticizing your every move, or questioning your worth, remember this: you are experiencing something deeply human. A mind shaped by millions of years of evolution, trying its best to protect you in a world very different from the one it was designed for. And maybe that understanding is the first step toward treating yourself with the same compassion you so freely give to others.
If you enjoyed today's video, you might want to consider hitting the like button and sharing it to others. Subscribe as well while you're at it, for good luck. Additionally, if you're interested, why not check these videos I handpicked just for you? And as always, stay curious.